Hi guys. This lesson is about Philip and Alexander the Great. Philip II to be exact, since there are more than one Philip. Our objective and essential question today are that today you will learn about Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia, Egypt, and invasion of India. And I have it here that you'll create trading cards, but you actually won't because I cut that part from the lesson. You're welcome. Our essential question is, how did Alexander's conquest spread Greek culture? So to start, we got to talk about a place called Macedonia. Macedonia was a kingdom situated just to the north of Greece. The Greeks considered the Macedonians to be barbaric and pretty uncivilized people. They did not like the Macedonians. They did not like the Macedonians at all. Meanwhile, the poor Macedonians, they really tried hard and they thought of themselves as Greeks. So you can see there's a bit of a disconnect there because the Macedonians think pretty highly of themselves and the Greeks think that they are pretty much garbage. They're kind of happy to live in this peaceful coexistence for a while with the Macedonians at the top, just kind of chilling, and the Greeks towards the south, just kind of sitting there and being a little judgy towards the Macedonians. Until a man named Philip comes to power. Philip II of Macedonia was educated using Greek tutors, and he studied in Greece when he was younger. This only helped him think of Macedonia as part of Greece. So he knew, because he was so educated, that Greeks thought pretty low of the Macedonians. But he also knew, because he was educated, that maybe the Greeks were onto something. They had better education, they had a higher standard of living, and they had a pretty much better developed civilization. So Philip tried to bring that kind of stuff back to Macedonia, where he lived. So Philip started to be preparing once he becomes king. Philip had long dreamed of conquering Greece, and he accomplished this by using diplomacy as well as diplomatic force, or as well as military force. So before Philip came to power in 359 BCE, Macedonia was pretty poor and they were pretty divided. They were a bunch of smaller little kingdoms which were often fighting amongst themselves, just like the Greek city-states used to fight amongst themselves. So Philip, when he came to power, decided that he was going to work to change all of that. He first worked to unite Macedonia by conquering smaller kingdoms within the region. And then what he did was he made some alliances with many of the smaller Greek city-states. And he would either threaten or bribe them into joining his cause. So by smaller Greek city-states, I'm not talking about Thebes or Athens or Sparta. I'm talking about city-states like Argos or Crete or Miletus or Mycenae or Megara. Just the pretty small Greek city-states that normally wouldn't be that exciting, except for that Philip was using them in order to conquer more territory more quickly. What Philip would usually do is he would get them to join his side, be on his team, and then he would slowly exert more and more pressure until they were with him completely and were willing to do what he wanted. So this allowed him to start to take over Greece. And by the time that he was ready to actually go and invade Greece, he had amassed an army that was stronger and more powerful than Sparta's. So using his military genius and his diplomatic ability, he captured one city-state after another and was really able to rack up a large amount of wins as he moved through the Greece. Meanwhile, in Greece, a philosopher named Demosthenes warned the Athenian people about the threat that Philip was posing. They said He's always taking in more, everywhere casting his net around us, while we sit idle and do nothing. When, Athenians, will you take the necessary action? What are you waiting for? So as Philip was conquering more and more Greek city-states, some people in Athens were calling on Athens to jump in to protect their neighbors, jump in to protect the less powerful city-states, while others were suggesting that Athens didn't have a role in protecting these other less powerful city-states, that Athens really should only worry about protecting itself. Unfortunately, this is the attitude that ruled the day for most Athenians, and most Athenians were just fine with the idea that everyone should be left on their own and should be protecting themselves. Obviously, it's harder to fight one united group than it is to fight smaller individual groups, so what eventually happens is that Philip conquers Greece. But that's not before a last-ditch effort by Athens and Thebes. In 338 BC, Athens and Thebes finally joined together to try to stop Philip, but they were too late and they were unsuccessful. At this point, Philip had already destroyed most of the armies of most of the other Greek city-states, and when he conquered Athens and he conquered Thebes, he pretty much gained control of the remaining parts of Greece, with the notable exception of Sparta. Now, if we look at this map, you can see how Philip expanded. You see that he slowly edges down and edges up. First, he goes around and he conquers these areas of Thessaly and Crocus. He gets all the way down to Delphi, and he also ends up conquering all of these other areas, which now are Thebes and Corinth and Athens and other places. You'll note that one prominent or one really big Greek city-state is not conquered. Any guesses as to which one it is? Yeah, clearly it's Sparta. So Sparta down there at the top is still in purple. Sparta remains independent here. Philip wrote to the leaders of Sparta, the military generals in charge. He said, if I enter Laconia was the state that Sparta was in Greece, the region where it is. He said, if I enter Laconia, I will burn Sparta to the ground. Philip was hoping that this would cause the Spartans to surrender, so he would not have to fight them and lose any men or any battles against them. But the Spartans just replied with the words, if you enter Sparta, implying that he would not even be able to get into the city to burn it down because the Spartans would be too strong. Luckily for the Spartans, and maybe luckily for Philip, they never had to actually see if what the Spartans had said would be true. Neither Philip nor his son, Alexander the Great, attempted to conquer Sparta. Unfortunately for Philip, however, he soon saw that his conquering days were over. After conquering all of Greece, with the exception of Sparta, Philip had planned to conquer Persia. Before he could do so, however, he was assassinated in the year 336 BCE. Poor dear. He did accomplish a lot, though. He made Macedonia a part of Greece, and he became the head of Greece, even though the Greeks had thought so little of Macedonians in general. When he died, his 20-year-old son Alexander became the king. Here again is a map of the conquests of Philip. You can see that he was aiming towards the Persian Empire, and that he narrowly missed getting it before he died. You can also see this line that says Philip's sphere of influence. Those are the areas in which Philip had direct control. And then we also have these states that are colored in and shaded lines. Those are areas and states that would have been friendly to Philip. But Philip's dead, so let's stop talking about him. Next, we have Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was very young. Like I said, he was just 20 years old, but he was a very experienced soldier. As soon as he became king, he decided that he would make his father's dreams come true, and he decided that he was going to invade the Persian Empire. Now, Persia, for its part, was weaker than it was when they had attempted to conquer Greece. You'll remember from another lesson that the Persian War was about when Persia came in and tried to conquer Greece. But the Persian Empire was still huge. It stretched all the way from Egypt all the way to India. As you can see in this map, pretty big location. All of that purple. An interesting thing about the Persian Empire is that they, depending on the year, had several capitals. This made them extremely difficult to defeat because their government was split in two. Alexander was not worried about this, however, and was certain that he could undertake the task of defeating the Persians. Alexander won his first battle against the Persians in 334 BC. He then led his army through Asia Minor, which is that area of land right opposite of Greece, and he was winning battle after battle with his soldiers. He led them onto Judea, which is modern-day Israel. He led them into Egypt, onto Babylon, the Persian capital. They finally crossed the Indus River into India, and they were taking huge amounts of territory with them as they went. This is a mural of what it might have looked like. Alexander's forces fighting the Indians as they went. As you note, there are a bunch of different people on both sides. There's a bunch of chaos and confusion. Over 11 years, Alexander had conquered Persia, he conquered Egypt, and he had conquered many of the lands between. And he had certainly earned the right to be called Alexander the Great. All of that purple on this map is the area which he had ended up conquering. Here's this map zoomed in again. The purple, dark purple over there is the original area of Macedon before Philip and before Alexander had gotten to conquering. And then we have in light purple the area which Philip had ended up taking by the end of his conquests. This green route follows his path. You see that he goes through Asia Minor. That's the area right next to Greece and Macedonia. He goes down through Egypt. He returns through Judea. He finds his way to Babylon, the Persian capital. And then they go through Persia and to the border of India. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can tell this or not, but the green arrow does circle around and start to go back, ultimately stopping in Babylon. This is because Alexander's troops refused to go any farther east than the Babylon or the Indus River in India. They, after having fought for a decade, began to tire of war and began to tire of fighting. And they said, "We want to go home, Alex." Alex eventually, despite being a warrior at heart, agreed and decided to take his men home. Alexander then led his troops back to Greece, but unfortunately came down with a fever in Babylon and died in 323 BC at age 32, just 12 and a half to 13 years after coming to the throne. Despite his early death, Alexander lived an accomplished and storied life, and his legacy is huge. Wherever Alexander went, he established brand new Greek cities. Many of these were named after himself. He would name them Alexandria or Alexandrinopolis, and they would be throughout the world. One of the most famous of these cities is the Egyptian city of Alexandria. These cities became Greek centers of culture, learning, art, and knowledge, and scholars would flock from all over to come to these cities to learn. After Alexander's death, his empire was split into three different Hellenistic means Greek, three different Greek kingdoms, which were ruled by three of his former commanders. They couldn't quite decide on which person would rule which part, so each person ended up getting a different chunk. As you can see on this map, there were three different major kingdoms. What happened here, though, is that several of the Greek city-states broke off and became parts of their own city-states again. This, as you might imagine, probably would have frustrated Alexander the Great, but his successors really didn't have the time to worry about fighting these battles because they were too busy trying to keep themselves together. It's very easy to conquer a huge amount of territory like this compared to how hard it is to govern a huge amount of territory like this. If you can imagine, this is probably like combining dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds and thousands of different cultures into one. However, now all of these places did have one unifying factor. They all had these Greek cultural ideas. They all had this new sense of Greek pride. And they had all been recently conquered by Alexander the Great, or his father, Philip. Now, Alexander in Egypt, when he was in Egypt, he founded one of the greatest of the Hellenistic cities. Hellenistic cities would be Greek cities outside of Greece. This city was called Alexandria after himself. He founded this city in 332 BC, and it became the capital of Egypt after a time. Over years, it grew famous as a center of business and trade and learning. There's a huge library and lighthouse at Alexandria, which scholars would travel all over the world to view. All of the Hellenistic cities, all of them were centers of learning, but Alexandria outshone them all. It had the largest library in the world, about 1 million scrolls, and scholars and writers came from around the world to use the library. If you can imagine, there wasn't the internet or Wikipedia or even encyclopedias hundreds of years ago. So thousands of years ago, the idea that you would have a library with more than 500,000 scrolls was fantastic. No one would have imagined that possible prior to Alexander the Great fostering this sense of learning in Egypt. The Greeks and Alexander the Great also were responsible for a great deal of advances in science. So math and science flourished in Alexandria. Around 300 BCE, a man named Euclid discovered geometry. There was another man named Eratosthenes, and he and other scientists studied the Earth, and using math and a bunch of different theorems, they were able to calculate the circumference or the distance around the Earth almost perfectly. Another man named Archimedes discovered that you could use pulleys and levers to lift heavy devices. So you could use a series of pulleys and levers to pick up different things, pick up different animals, different objects. Things like this made trade much easier, as people could carry things that were heavier than them, as people could move things that were above their own weight. You also, I am certain of it, use different Greek formulas and different Greek ideas in everyday life. While it's not mentioned here, I am sure that you've all done some work with the Pythagorean theorem. Pythagoras, obviously, was a Greek who came up with a different way of computing numbers to figure out the area of triangles and the way to discover the missing parts of a triangle. Other Greek inventions that are notable include the amphitheater, a way of acoustics that helps deliver sound, and, little old democracy, which the United States still uses today and many other countries still use today. After the Greeks fell and no longer were an empire, under Alexander or any other place, democracy was not seen again for another 2,000 or so years. So the Greeks really, really, really were very ahead of their time, and we have a lot to thank them for today.